Hello and welcome back. This is part 7 of a series covering the Hare programming language, and in this video we are going to do pattern matching and error handling. Now, if you look in the description, you will find a link to this repository, and I have put this up on my source hut. This is the link that you want if you're going to clone this repo. This is the code that we're going to be going through for this video. So if you click on tree, you can see it's right here in the pattern matching folder, and these are the examples. Okay, now there might be very slight variations of these um, for this video, but these are the main examples that I created and that I am going to be working off of. So if we look at example 1, this is just pretty much exactly where we left off from the last video, which was tagged unions. And that's what you need to really understand pattern matching. And we're basically going to start from this example right here. Okay? So please feel free to clone this repo. The link is in the description if you want the code on your system so that you can follow along. Okay? So let's go ahead and jump over into the text editor. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started from where we left off last time. And so that would be the previous video, which is 6 in the series. So please watch that if you need to get up to speed for tagged unions. And we're basically going to create the same example, and then I'm going to go into pattern matching from there. Now, the format that I'm going to use is it's a very progressive steps in order to introduce you to pattern matching, because I had to go learn Haskell in order to learn pattern matching. Okay, so I'm kind of trying to save you from that. Now, I'm not trying to discourage that. If you would like to go learn Haskell, that's fine. But I'm just trying to have to save you from that extra step. And the reason I settled on Haskell was because that's where I found had the most learning resources. Okay. So let's go ahead and just basically start where we left off last time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a type of a tagged union, which is going to be a rune and a string. Okay, and it's going to be of type text. Now, here I will create a function. I'll call it return type and give it a basic parameter, and it takes type text. And if you remember, this returns a rune and a string. Okay, let's open up the function body, and what we want to say is if val, so if this value is rune, return R, so this is just going to be a rune. Okay, else return string, and so this is a string literal. So that is the basic function that we are working off of. Okay, now let's go ahead and just create a let binding, and we'll call it foo of type text, and I'll give it H for Hare. Now, if you remember, what we did last time is we basically had this. Okay, we created another variable, and we have our function call, and then we're passing in foo. Okay, and if we print this, that should be bar. Okay, if we capture this return value into bar, foo is a rune, so this is what we're mainly concerned about right here, is this return type from our function, which is aptly named return type. Okay, so when I run this, this is going to print R. Okay, And you can see it prints R because it's returning a rune character. Okay, so now here is where we get into pattern matching. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let me just delete this. And we're going to create the match expression right here, and we use the match keyword. Okay, so we say match and open up a set of parentheses like we are calling a function. Okay, now inside of this match expression is where we call our function. Okay, so let's call return type, and we want to pass in foo. Okay, so let me just give you a second to absorb that syntax. Okay, and then what we want to do is, just like we are creating a function, we want to open up the match body. Okay, so that's what we have so far, is our match expression, and we call it like a function, and inside of the match expression parentheses is where we're calling our function, and here we're passing in foo. Okay, which at this point is a rune. Okay, now what we use is a case statement. Okay, so it looks like this. Okay, it looks like case type. Okay, and then this operator, and then do something. Okay, that is in essence what a match expression is made of. Okay, so let me go ahead and, so it's case type, and this is what we're matching against. Okay, is the return type of our function return type. This is what we're actually matching against. Okay, so let me go ahead and remove this and put a proper, so we would say case, and then we want to evaluate this first type. Okay, so we want to evaluate a rune. If it's a rune, what we're doing here is saying it looks very much like a switch. Okay, so we're basically saying case rune, and then you need this arrow operator, which is the equal sign and then the greater than sign. So we say case type, the type that we want to evaluate first. Generally, from your functions in Hare, your first return type from a function is usually going to be your success case. Okay, so then we drop down a line and indent. Now notice that the case expression is in line with the match. Okay, that's what you want. Okay, now here I'm just going to say, and then this is the code that we want to run if return type returns a rune. And I'm just going to say something very simple. I'm going to say, I'm just going to print something. Okay, I'm going to say print rune, and this was going to be in all caps. Okay, so this is our first case that we're evaluating. We're calling the function inside of our match expression, and what's happening is match is evaluating the return type. Okay, so let me say match evaluates the return, and I'll put this in all caps, the return type. Okay, now I'm going to handle this second value. Okay, I'm going to handle a string. So I'm going to say case str, we put the arrow operator, and then drop down a line, and this is the code that's going to run if return type returns type string. And I'm going to say just something very simple, and I'll put this in all caps so that we don't confuse it with this return value here. I'll say string. Okay, so what this is saying is we open up our match expression and call our function inside of it. Okay, here we are evaluating if it returns type rune and then do something. Okay, case string, do something. Now at this point foo is a rune. Okay, but it is a tagged union. but technically it's a rune. So when we pass this into our return type function here, okay, it's going to return R, which is a rune, okay? And so the match expression is going to evaluate this return type, and this is the line of code right here that's going to run, okay? It's going to print out rune in all caps, okay? So I'll give you a moment to sort of absorb this, but please feel free to pause the video at this point if you need. And again, all of this code is in the repo that I will leave a link in the description. So please feel free to clone it and so that you have it on your system. Okay? So let's go ahead and run this program. And you can see that it prints rune in all caps. Okay? Now let's try a string. Okay? What we could do, okay, we could say, if we wanted to, we could cast this to a string. Okay, I'll show you both ways. Okay, so when we're passing in foo, it's a rune, but it can take it can take on type string. But in any case, this is a cast. So we're casting foo to type string. So when when it comes into return type, it's going to return string, which is type string, and this is the code now that is going to run because our match expression is going to evaluate that type. And this is the code right here. Okay? And so you see that it returned type string and it printed string in all caps. Okay? And that is this line of code in action right here. Okay? So hopefully that's clear. Please clone um, the repo in the description if you need to, and that way you can run this code on your system. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next example. Okay, now let's work on example 3 in the repo. And what I want to do is introduce an error type, okay? So we do that in the same way that we created our text type, which is with the type keyword. So let's say type, and you can call this whatever you would like. I'll say invalid, and I'll just make it an error type of void. Now if you recall, when the error flag prepends a type like this, this is an error type, okay? Now let's go ahead and modify this function to return this error type, okay? So I'm going to replace this with invalid and also this right here. So you can see if the value that we pass into return type is not a rune, it's going to return this error type that we created. So now in this function signature, we are returning a tagged union of a rune or an error type, okay? So now what we want to do is let's go ahead and right here let's place our match statement, our match expression, and let's call return type and pass in foo, okay? Open up the match body, and here is where we handle the different types. So generally in Hare, your first case is going to be your success case, okay? So remember, we say case type, okay? So the type that we want to evaluate first is rune, and then you place the arrow operator, drop down a line, and this is the code that's going to run if return type returns a rune, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing as before and just say, and just print rune in all caps, okay? Now, same thing for the error type. all we're doing is evaluating the type. So we say case invalid, and that's evaluating the type. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say we're going to print error in all caps, okay? So when I run this program now, we're passing in foo, which is which at this point is a rune, okay? So this is the code that's going to run, and then what we're going to do is pass in a string, and it's actually going to trigger this error, okay? So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see that it prints rune, okay? Now let's go ahead and get it to return an error type. Now what we could do is, what I could do is, again, I could just cast this to a string if I wanted to. Hopefully, I'm trying not to confuse you though. Okay, so let's just make this a string. Okay, so we'll say Hare rocks. Okay, and so now when we pass in foo to return type, what's actually going to be returned is this error. Okay, and when our match expression evaluates return type, the return type of return type, it's going to handle this case right here. And this is the code that's going to run if invalid is returned, which it will be. So now it's going to print error in all caps, okay? So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see it prints error in all caps because we passed in a string, so now it's returning an actual error type, okay? So again, please feel free to clone the repo so that you have this code on your system, and you can follow along, or you can sort of play around with that code so that you have the actual functioning code on your system. Okay, so now what I want to do in this next little part is introduce what's called case-let syntax. Okay, so now I want to introduce what's called case-let syntax. And this is a way to capture our return value, okay? So how we do that is inside of our match expression, let's go ahead and call our match expression and then call our function and pass in foo, okay? Let me go ahead and delete this and make this a rune again. So now let's open up the match body, and the first case that we want to handle is our success case, which is a rune. Okay, so what this is going to look like in order to capture, so far we've just been matching against the return type. Okay, now we actually want to capture this value right here, this return value. Okay, so what that looks like, we can use the case-let syntax, and you can define a variable and be of type rune. Okay, and that's what the syntax looks like. Now think of this right here as a declaration, just like this. You notice it's the exact same thing. So what we're doing with the case-let syntax is we are capturing this return value right here inside this variable within our match expression, okay? And so now what we can do is we can, instead of just printing out something arbitrary like rune or error in all caps, we can actually print out Okay, sorry. Now we can actually print out what this actual value is that's being returned, okay? And again, we're capturing that here in this variable. You could name this whatever you wanted, okay? This is just arbitrary. I like to name mine success just so it's clear in my mind and in my code when I look at it and I can see what's happening, okay? So that's the success case, which is a rune. And again, we're capturing this value inside this variable right here, okay? Now, I won't overwhelm you too much, so let's just say case invalid. There is a caselet syntax for errors. I'll introduce that next, okay? Let's not go too far yet. And if we get an error case, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I'm just going to print error in all caps, okay? So again, with the caselet syntax, just think of this right here. Again, notice that this is a variable declaration, okay? So think of it like that. And inside of this variable named success, we're capturing the actual return value of our function here. So it's going to capture R. So when I run this code, it's going to print R, just like we did in the very first example, okay? So let's go ahead and run this program. Let me clear my screen. Okay, I am forgetting I have to handle this error for print line. You generally don't use print line inside of a match expression like this. I can show you what we're actually going to do, okay? In any case, let's go ahead and run this program. And you can see it prints R, okay, because we're capturing the return value of our function that's called return type, okay? So we're actually capturing this value right here inside of this variable with the caselet syntax. And in this case, we're just printing it, okay? Now, let me show you what you generally do when you use the caselet syntax and handle a success case. So generally what you do, say you want to return, say you want to capture your return value inside of another variable, okay? The syntax, what that would look like is, we'll say let bar, okay, now here, okay, so you see what's going on here, okay? We have let bar, and then we're using our match statement here and calling return type. Now, with inside of our success branch, okay, you use the yield keyword and say success. And what this does is evaluates this compound expression and returns its value back to the caller, which in this case it's going to put it inside a bar, okay? So let me go ahead and perhaps that was a little confusing. Let me start over with this, okay? So if we want to capture our actual function's return value inside another variable, we say case let bar, excuse me, sorry. So we say let bar, and now we'll call our match expression, okay? And we'll pass in, we will call our function, and we'll pass in foo, okay? Now we're going to use the caselet syntax. And again, remember, this is arbitrary. What we could do, we could say my variable. I don't like naming things my variable, my function, my struct, that kind of thing. I don't like naming things like that. And I just say success, okay? And this is going to be a rune arrow operator. And then we use the yield keyword, okay, yield. And then what are we yielding? We're yielding this variable. We're yielding this value back to bar, okay? So it's yield and then whatever your variable is, okay? Now for the error type, let's just do the same thing as before. So we'll say case invalid, and we're just going to print error, okay? So what are we doing here? We are capturing the return value inside of this variable, and we're yielding it back to bar in this case, okay? Because what the yield keyword does is it evaluates a compound expression and it returns its value, okay? So think of the yield keyword just like return, okay? Except it's used inside of a magic, it's used inside of an expression, okay? Hare is an expression-based language, so it's very similar to a lot of functional languages in that respect, okay? So now what we've done here is inside a bar is this return value. Oops, excuse me. Inside a bar is this return value. Okay, is our rune. Okay, and so now what we can do is we can say, and let's go ahead and print bar. Okay, and when I run this function, let me just go ahead and give you a moment to look at that. When I run this function, it's going to print this actual value because we're capturing this value inside of this success variable. Okay. Let me clear my screen. And you can see when we print bar, it prints R. So, so hopefully that's clear. Um, Again, please feel free to clone the repo down in the link, and please feel free to watch this video again if you need to. Now, I am trying to break this down as simple as possible, okay? Um, and I really can't think of a simpler way to introduce you to error handling than this. I'm really sort of building this up progressively, okay? So so now what we are going to do is handle an actual error type, and in this instance we are going to use the caselet syntax for our error as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now what I would like to do is introduce the caselet syntax for errors in order to actually capture that error message, and then also the string error function in order to print that error message in a human readable form. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up HareDoc, and what we want to do is look at errors error. Okay, this is the errors module, and you can see that this type error is a tagged union of all error types. Okay, so what I am going to do, I'm just going to arbitrarily sort of grab one of these that might fit our scenario here, and that is this invalid type. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at that. And you can say a function was called with an invalid combination of arguments. And again, you can see that this is exactly the error type that we created. Okay, except this is defined in the errors module. And now there is some extra functionality for working with this error type, okay, because we are going to be printing this error type into a human readable form, okay. So let's go ahead and jump back into our code, and we want to handle that right here. So here is our success case. I haven't changed much about this example. We are yielding our return value here. We're yielding it back to bar, okay? What I want to do is use the caselet syntax. So I'll say caselet error, ERR, that's a very common abbreviation in many programming languages. And in this case, we want to say errors invalid. Okay, then use our error operator. Now, I should have done this to start with. Let's import the errors module. Okay, so you can see the syntax here. This is caselet error, and here, right here in this variable, ERR, is where I'm capturing the actual value, okay? Now, what we want to do is make our function return type errors invalid, okay? And we're using this is an error type, again, defined in the standard library, okay? So, here is the syntax for that. Caselet, we're capturing the error message right here in this, okay? Now, what we are going to do here is we're going to use a function that is going to print the error message and terminate our program, okay? And in that instance, it's fmt fatal f, and this is a formatted function, okay? And so I'm just going to say error, and then here's where our formatting happens, okay? Is within this right here. This is just like if you were to call print f in C, and then you had like %s for a string, or percent, d for an integer, or percent f for a float. This is where it's formatted, okay? And then your actual value, your variable, gets plugged in here. Okay, now because we are printing invalid, which is in the errors module, we want to stringify this error message, okay? So if we look in the errors module and we look at a function called strError, you can see it converts an error into a human-friendly string representation, okay? And it returns a string, okay? You see that here? So, and we pass in our error, okay? So what that looks like is we're going to call that right here. So we say errors, because it's in the errors module, strError, and we pass in our error right here. This is what we're passing in, is this right here, okay? We're passing this to our string error function. I misspelled that. So we're passing this to our string error function, and again, if we look at the Hare doc for this, this is going to stringify this error message, okay? So what we're doing here is we are calling return type and passing in foo, which is a tagged union of a rune and a string. At the moment, it has type rune, and if we were to run this program, we would yield the return type right here back to bar and then print it out, okay? So let's go ahead and run this program. And you can see that that is indeed what's happening, okay? Now, let's go ahead and trigger this error message, okay? So what I'm going to do, again, what you could do is you could just cast this to a string if you wanted, okay? But what I'm going to do is just make this a string. I'm going to say Hare rocks, okay? Now, so foo has type string str, and when we pass this in, you can see when we pass this into return type, it's going to return errors invalid. We're capturing the actual return value. Okay, so not the type. We're evaluating the type here. Okay, this is the return value. This is the actual error message. Okay, now you see error is just what I put in. So here's where I'm calling error string error. I'm passing this in to stringify it, and it's going to be printed here. Okay, so now let's look and see what happens when we run this program. Let me clear my screen. And you can see here is the error that I typed in. This is the string that I typed in. Then this is what gets formatted. Okay? A function was called with an invalid combination of arguments. And this is what the string error function did inside of the errors module. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at that again. So that's right here. And again, because the error that we are concerned with is errors invalid, we have to use the string error function that's in the errors module. Okay? Now, for example, if we were to handle an IO error, okay, we would use this function, IO string error, and you can see it converts an IO error into a user-friendly string. So every module has a string error function in order to stringify the error messages, okay? And this is how you use them right here, is like this. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this function and see what's happening here, okay? So you can see it formats text for printing, writes it to standard error, followed by a line feed, then exits the program with an error status, okay? So this function, this is idiomatic Hare, what I'm showing you. This is used in order to print error messages. And you can see that this returns type never. Okay, that's just like calling abort. Okay, if you were to look up in the Hare language spec what never is, it's a type that signifies that a function is guaranteed to never return. Okay, so this is basically just terminating our program. As you can see, it exits the program. Okay. So that's what's happening here. And we are using the formatted version of this function, okay? If we look and see, there is also a version that is called just FMT fatal. And let me clear my screen. So what I want to do is basically show you the difference between these two functions. So we have this one, and then we have the formatted version. Okay, well, what is the difference between these two? It's the same difference as we have the print line function, okay, and then we also have the print format line function. It's basically the same thing, okay? One takes a type of formatable, which is FMT formatable, and the other is where you can actually format your arguments, okay? Now, I'll show you generally how you use the non-formatted version of this function, okay? So what you would generally say is just the type, okay? So case errors, invalid, and you would say, and then you would just put in your own error message, okay? So we're going to say error invalid, okay? Just that right there. Because we're not capturing the error condition and printing it with the string error function, so we don't have to format it. That's generally how this version of the function is used, okay? So if we get this error type, we're printing just this custom error message. Okay, so let's look at that. So you see, this is what I typed in. Okay. So that is the difference between the formatted and non-formatted version of this function. Okay. So that is error handling in Hare. Again, please feel free to clone the repo that's down in the description. And let me just go ahead and show you one more time the syntax for this, okay? If we want to handle an error message with caselet, we usually say error and then the type of the error. Okay, so this would be errors, invalid, and then the arrow operator. And in this instance, we are going to use FMT, and we're going to use the formatted version of this. Okay, and what I like to just say is error, and then I put in the format right here. Okay, now again, we need the string error function inside the errors module. So we say errors, str error, and then pass in, we're passing this in right here to the string error function because this is the actual return value of this. Okay, here's the type. Okay, this is the value. Okay, and in Hare we generally say result, a result type for the return type, or result value. So the return of a function is generally referred to as the result. Okay. So again, let me go ahead and run this function and let's see what it does. And you can see this is the stringified version of the return value that we captured inside this right here. Okay, so we're capturing the value and passing it into the string error function. Okay, so that is that. I have broken this down as basic as I can possibly think. Okay, and I have tried to give you a progressive step into error handling with pattern matching. Now, in the previous video, I said that this is probably going to be the real hurdle that you're going to have to jump over in order to be successful with this language and to be comfortable with this language. And for me, this was the hardest thing that I had to really understand with the language. Once you understand this, though, it's I want to encourage you to please push through trying to understand this because, in my opinion, once you master error handling with pattern matching and tagged unions in Hare, and that is both the syntax and the semantics of it, okay? Pretty much my opinion is that most things from here are basically downhill, okay? So this is, again, sort of the real hurdle that you're going to have to jump over in order to successfully and effectively use this language, okay? So I want to encourage you to please stick with this and please, if you want to, please try your best to get this down. Now, if you have any issues, please ask in the comments. I will try my best to help you. Or you can also jump on the Hare users mailing list or the IRC. Okay, please, if you need help, please don't be, afraid or ashamed to reach out for help. Okay, we're all in different phases of learning. Okay, and we all learn things in different ways and at different paces. So please reach out for help if you need it. Okay. And hopefully this is pretty clear. Um, you know, really what I'm showing you here, this is just straight, idiomatic Hare. Okay, this right here, the pattern matching. Now, I had to learn this again. I had to learn Haskell in order to learn pattern matching like this, okay, because there was no real resource on it. Um, for Hare, there is the tutorial, but that was kind of intimidating for me, okay? So what I've tried to do is introduce you to pattern matching in Hare in sort of the way that I wish it could have been introduced to me. Now, we're all on different, journeys, and maybe that's just how it had to happen with me. But again, this is why I'm writing my book, is because I really had to learn this all on my own, and I had to dig into the Hare language spec and really experiment with this on my own, and then also look through a lot of idiomatic Hare code. So, a lot of the repos on SourceUp, for example, Drew has his code for Aries OS, and then there is a section on the Harelang website that has a bunch of projects that are built in Hare. And so really I just had to look at a lot of Hare code and understand what was going on. So I'm trying to sort of give you the introduction that I sort of wish I was able to have in order to understand this perhaps in a little bit easier fashion. Okay? So I really do hope this was helpful. Okay, and this is going to be part one of this video. In the next part, we're going to jump back over into the tutorial, the official tutorial, and actually carry on from there. And so, but I felt that for me personally, this was the most confusing part of this language. When I came to Hare, I had been programming for about a year, and the main language that I was using and I was comfortable with was C. Okay, well in C you have a global value that which is error no, and you don't have to handle errors in C. Okay, that's one of the problems with it. And since Hare is trying to improve upon C, um, and really cut down on all the edge cases and the errors, in Hare there is mandatory error handling. Okay, so in the next video we're going to actually jump into, calling standard library functions and dealing with those types of errors. Okay, so I really do hope that you found this helpful. Again, there is the repo in the description, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments, or again, please jump on the Hare users mailing list if you need to. So that's it for this video for now, and please join for the next video. Okay, so thank you so much, and have a nice rest of your day.